Recording. All right. So starting today, we're going to jump into some additional topics. So can you guys hear me online?
Yes.
Yes.
So what we're going to talk starting today is some of the newer technology. So you understood it, how the overall life cycle happens of requirements, taking into a tree, getting into the test case, and testing the test case with the application and the tool. We're going to start getting some of the basic concepts and going to start doing it some how you can test some of the services that we talked about. Remember the Amazon example that I gave you? If you have to do a payment, you have to go to interact with the banking systems. So how are those services are kind of written and tested is what we're going to talk about today. Okay. But before that, I wanted like certain basic concepts, because as we get into automation and some of things, you will need a little bit of this basic concepts. So in your folder, the next sequential module is module 6, which is the database. So we're going to skip that for now. We'll come back to that later. So module 7 is what you have it around the basic programming concepts. Now, as a QA, you're not going to write code. But if you're doing some automation testing, you need to understand it, how to manage with some of the code. Also, when you start looking at some of the pieces that might be provided by the development team, it gives you a little bit better understanding of how they've structured their program as well as the design. Okay. So we're going to talk very, very basic concepts of the programming. Okay. So the goal is to give you guys a high level understanding so that when you look at the code, at least you can understand what might be happening. Okay. So let's talk about the structure. Okay. So what you're going to see is most of the programs is going to follow a similar structure, okay, irrespective of the language that you're going to use it. So typically you will have something like, if I look at it as a block, you will have some start or potentially an end. So you will have a block that indicates it, hey, where does my program start and where does this particular component end? Okay. Then you will have certain segments called a variable space. Okay. A lot of times it's also known as temporary storage space. Okay. And then you'll have executable statements. Okay. So whenever you're it's doing some sort of computing, you're always going to have something known as a temporary storage that you may need to do it. So for example, let's say if I'm doing a big addition, okay, which requires it's 3 and 4 different parts. If I'm using calculator, right, you use something known as a memory button, right, that you will do a partial sum and you save it in the memory. You will continue with doing some additional, and then you will recall memory and add the memory and manipulate it, right? Everybody has used those features in the calculator, right? Same concept in the computer world. Okay. You're going to have executable statements, which essentially performs all those operations, but they will need some temporary storage to keep it into the memory so that they can use it during computing. Okay. And then you will have a start and end block. So let's look at it. Well, so let's look at the examples. Okay. So here you're going to see 2 different languages. The first one is Transact SQL, or it's a programming language. It's typically used to manage and manipulate the data in the database. And then Java C#, it's something also known as the third generation and fourth generation language. Okay. So if you look at here, I don't know if I can, yeah, I can. So if you look into this one, okay, it's essentially announcing that, hey, I want to create or replace something known as a hello world procedure. Okay. So all it does is, this is a naming this block. It's saying that, hey, everything that follows it, if somebody externally wants to refer that program, they're going to refer that as a hello world. Okay. Then, remember we said that that's going to have a starting block, which indicates this is where it starts, this is where it ends. Okay. And in this simple construct, this is, I don't want any temporary memory or variable storage space. So there's nothing announced that. The only thing it is that this is an executable statement, right? So this is, name, right? This is start block. And this is your statement. Okay. All it does is on your screen, it just prints hello world. Now, if I look at the same program or trying to accomplish the same thing in Java or C#, this one is known as a C#. Okay, here is the naming, which is the same as this one that you talked about. Okay, this one, this curly braces, that's what it talks about, the start and end of the block. Right? This is a different syntax used in that language, but it still performs the same thing. As this is the start block and this is the end block. Okay, and here is the scope of this particular class is defined by these two things. And this is your executable statement, which is performing the same thing as printing hello world. Okay. Any question in terms of this program structure? Okay. Let's take another example. Okay. Same two languages, transact SQL and Java C#. Here you have a temporary memory storage or placeholders that will be used to manipulate the data as you go to compute it. Right. So if you look into it here, there are two things defined. Right. So this is the variable storage. Okay. So in this case, I still have my example as the procedure, which is saying, hey, this block is going to be known as my example. It has temporary storage. Then it's going to tell me where my execution is going to start and where it's going to be end, right? So this is the block. And here are my executable statements. So here what it does is it takes that temporary storage called age and says that, hey, it's going to store all the numbers. It's a type integer. And I'm going to set that variable to value 21. So that's what this particular statement is doing. Okay. Then it takes that second memory storage and says, I'm going to assign a value k to that. Because it holds only one character, I'm going to assign only one character to it. Okay. So in a programming world, all those variables will be holding certain types of value, and you have to declare what type of value is stored. Then it just says that, hey, when I want to print it, I'm going to utilize those variables. And the way you do it in transact SQL is essentially you take whatever the message you want to do it, and you concatenate through the plus operator. It says I am and then plus age plus years old. So what it will do, it'll take whatever the value was, set it up and replace it here at the runtime. It says I am 21 years old. Same thing, my middle initial is, and then it'll take whatever value of that particular storage is, and then it will display it. Okay. Similar thing into C#. I have a temporary variable called age of type integer, and I have a string which called middle initial. I'll assign the values, compute time, and then execute it. Yes, understand how the program block is structured? Any questions online? Are you guys good? Oh. So let's talk about some of the basic things that you will need it when you understand when you do the program. Okay. So in a compute world, you're going to have two different types of operator. One is called an assignment operator, and the other one is called Boolean operators. Okay. So the Boolean operators, essentially, all they do it is, hey, when I execute that operator or statement that contains that operator, it's going to tell me just one simple answer, whether that thing is true or false. It's two values. Okay. So if you remember the password example that we talked about, right? The condition is password has to be 8 characters, and it has to have 1 uppercase, and it has to have 1 special character, right? So if I have to implement that into the programming language, that means I need something which essentially allows me to perform that end operations, and then comes out and says, hey, yes, it meets all those 3 conditions, right? So the way you do it is through the Boolean operator. Okay. So here is like 4 examples, like I put it for the language and how you represent in math. So if you do it math and computational math, right, you will see it whenever people write an equation. If they want to do an AND operation, they will do an upper caret. If they're trying to do an OR operation, they'll do a lower caret. Right? And the NOT is like it represents through this character. Okay. So if you go into statistics and probabilities, that's what all those operators are using. In case of a SQL language, if you're trying to do it and, you will see it, the capitalized AND word in between. Okay. If I'm doing a C#, it's an ampersand. That indicates that, hey, I'm trying to do an AND operation. Okay. Visual Basic, if you look at it, it's a lot more closer to SQL in terms of language. Okay. And then when you look into OR operators, in a C#, you will see it 2 vertical types. And that indicates it's an OR operator. Exclamation indicates it's a NOT operator, right? So if you're trying to like check it, is this condition not true, right? So you can just say, hey, and something like, I'm trying to enter the room and the door is not open, then I need to perform open the door task. Okay. Those kind of things are done. The second set of operator you're going to have it is comparison operator, in addition to the assignment operators, right? So the comparison operators are essentially tries to compare the 2 sides, the left side and right side. And then based on whatever the operator you use it will give you answer either true or false again. So if you're trying to do it, something is greater than another value, then you can put a equation or something on the left-hand side, use this greater than operator, something on the right-hand side, and says, is this true or false? So if the left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side, it will come out as true. If that's not the case, the resultant value will be false. So you can check on those conditions by comparing things. Okay. In the most commonly used comparative operators, you can see it as greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to, inequality, as well as equal to. Okay. So you will start the equality. So if the left hand side is equal to right hand side, then it'll try to see this thing. If it is greater than equal to, less than equal to, or if it's not equal to. Same thing with the other languages, where it says, if you would have gone here, right? All these things, you just see it single thing. Those are known as an assignment operator. That means I'm assigning the value. Okay. So versus this one is I'm setting it equal to that. So depending on where you use it, it'll come through. Okay. Then another concept is used is the conditional statement. Okay. So I don't know if you guys have used flowcharts, right? So when you're trying to do it, any process things, you can just say, hey, do this step after you're done with this. So if I'm cooking, let's say for example, right? And the instructions, there are like 10 steps, right? The expectation is I'll follow one after another one. Like it's maybe first wash the vegetables, then chop all of them, right? Then boil them, and then put spices and put curry. Those kind of things, those are known as the sequential steps, right? I have to do the first step before doing the second step. I can't do it afterwards. I can't chop the vegetables after I boiled it, right? It's expected that, hey, if you're going to use it, chop it first and then boil it. So you're going to have, same way in a programming language, you're going to have some statements that's going to follow a sequential path only. And there will be a scenario where you may have to make a decision, right? Say, hey, is certain condition achieved? Yes, then go this path. If not, then go to use the other path, right? So in the Amazon example, right, that we talked about it, you can just say, hey, at the checkout time, do you have a shipping address from the user's login? If it's yes, you just prompt that, do you want to ship at this address? If there is no shipping address, then you prompt them to enter the shipping address, right? So depending on what is a certain condition, you take this path or that path. In the middle, you will have those evaluator, which is, hey, what is the condition that I'm trying to evaluate? And then you're going to have an iterator. So let's take a look at each one of them. Okay. So if you look at it here, okay, this is an example of the code block on the transact SQL, which talks about the statements, right? So here are my statements. Okay. So my first statement is I'm going to set the department value to be 5. Then I'm going to check if the department is 5, then do this, else do this. So the flow is going to be, it's always going to execute department equal to 5 first. Then it's going to look into the sequential and says, oh, the next statement is if department equal to 5. But wait, that is a conditional statement. It is trying to check the condition, is the value of the department is 5. I'm going to get a yes or no answer. And based on that, if it is yes, I'm going to do this, right? But if that's not the true, then I want to execute this statement. So this is your conditional value. Is the department equal to 5 or not? Okay. Same way if I want to do it in C# or a Java, this is my sequential statement, number 1, and then this is number 2, which is conditional. So it goes at saying yes and no. Okay. If you look into the first example that we're looking, right? All of these 4 statements, they are sequential. There's no condition. It will always go and execute in that order only. Okay. Then we talked about sequential, conditional, and then the third one is iterative. So this particular commands or flows is used when I want to repeat certain things over and over again. Okay. So let's take an example, right? I want to keep prompting user till he or she enters certain value. So a lot of times when you're going to a website and you're filling some forms, or let's even take an example, right? You are like, it's trying to enter a user ID and a password, right? It's going to keep prompting user ID and password till you get it right, right? So it's, you can see it, it's sometimes it's in the loop, and it will stay in that loop till certain conditions are met. Okay. Versus sometimes when you say, hey, I'm in the form, and that form has 3 contact number. What is your home number? What is your mobile number? And what is your alternate number? Right? In that case, I'm not checking in the loop till certain condition becomes true, but I'm checking it only 3 times. Did you enter home number? Did you enter mobile number? Did you enter other number? As long as you did that, I'm done. So your iteration could be either predetermined number, or it could be go till certain condition happens. Okay. So if you're looking at it, a specific number of type thing, then you will use a for loop. I know it needs to be executed only X number of times. That's what I'm going to use it. Okay. But if I have a condition where I'm going to keep repeating that thing till certain thing happens, then it will be a while loop. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the examples of this. Okay. So here on the left-hand side, you have a for loop, and the right-hand side, you have a while loop. So here, it is going to go to 1 through 10. It says, hey, start my counter at 1. Go till that counter reaches value 10. And increment that counter by 1 every time. So this is my start, this is my end, and this is my incremented value. And it says, for that many times, keep doing this task. So this will print hello world 10 times. Okay. And the next one becomes a while loop. If I want to accomplish the same thing in a while loop, the way I will do it is that, hey, set the initial value of a variable. Keep repeating things till that variable reaches the value 10. Right? If it's a less than 10, keep doing it. So keep validating, is the condition reached there or not? And then keep printing hello world. And then they try to like it's increment this value. Okay. I could just say it simply like I can do it I plus 3. If I change this condition from I equal to I plus 1 to I equal to I plus 3, it will execute only 3 times. Because the first time it will be 1, it will go run it. Then it will update the value of I to 4 and says, is 4 less than 10? Yes, it will go ahead and execute that. Then it will become 7 and says, is this 7? Yes, let me execute it. The third time it will become 10. We'll go check, is it still less than or equal to 10? Yes, I'll execute it, right? So it will start with 1, goes till 10. So it will execute total of 4 times. Okay.
For loop again, I is less or equal to 10. So like, does it has to say less or equal to 10?
It could be less than equal to 10, or you can use any equality operator, right? I could do it I is less than 10. And in that case, it'll just execute only 9 times. Right. So in a lot of times, if you don't certain language, you don't have to put an increment. It'll automatically increment only by 1. Okay. But here in this case, in a while loop, you have to put the condition. Some factor has to influence that value. If they don't, let's say if I don't put this statement, it'll go in infinite loop because my value of I will always remain 1, right? And it's always going to be true here. So it's always going to keep printing. So you will see it sometime when you try to do certain things and say, why this keeps doing it? It never comes out. Because some programmer or developer forgot to put the condition that's going to make that change. Okay. Any questions?
For loops, it will execute in one step.
No, it will execute a predetermined number of times, right? And then that is going to be determined by here. Versus this will be an external factor that might be influencing it. Like, so for example, if you are trying to like it's log in, you don't provide the password and keep clicking enter, right? It'll just keep saying it that, hey, you haven't provided a password, you haven't provided a password. Now, a lot of application you're going to see it is going to allow you only 3 times, and then it will lock, right? So in those cases, you will use the for loop because I'm going to try to give you 3 attempts. Every time you fail it, I'm going to increment that counter. And then if it is fine, then I'll break it out from there. If it's not, I'll lock you. Right? So depending on how your requirement tells it that, hey, allow them to enter the password only 3 times versus keep asking them for a password till they get it right, then you know that the programmer is going to use either one way or go the other path based on a requirement. Okay.
Okay, so the infinite thing that happens in while loop. So if we don't give condition in the for loop, so doesn't that happen here as well?
So as I mentioned, right, in a for loop, increment is by default. Sometimes if you wanted like it's give a different increment value, then you provide that thing. But it will always count it out like it goes from a start to end condition. So in here, if I would have just said, not said I equal to I plus 1, it would still execute only 10 times. Or I can just say I equal to I plus 2, then it will execute only 6 times.
And if I don't give the condition I is less than equal to 10, I just give I is equal to 1, then I is equal to I plus 1.
So in a for loop, you have to put a bound that how many times you want to execute it. It's a predetermined time, right? So this is a fixed number of times.
Okay.
So whenever I want to check certain things fixed number of time, I'll use for loop. If I want to check based on a condition, I'll use while loop.
Okay, so if we don't put the statement here, I is less than equal to 10, it still works.
Well, no, you need it. Here, you still need those conditions because
No,
that's how it's set out.
Mhm.
Here, this is the check condition that you are performing with. I have to give some condition. While loop requires you to provide what condition you want to loop on. Okay, and I'm saying I want to loop on a condition where I is less than or equal to 10. Remember, like it's whenever you want to make certain decision, you have to tell it on what condition you're making that decision. All right, it's good. Okay.
Yep.
So what this will help you is when later on, when we do an automation and you start looking at some of the code, you will understand it, how the things are organized. Okay. Now, let's talk the second concept, which is known as HTML, which also stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Okay. So the question is, why do you want to understand? Most of the web applications, they're built using an HTML. At the end of the day, your browser is nothing but an HTML rendering machine. So I want you to first think about concept, right? So when you go to, let's say, I go to my browser and type cnn.com. So it's a web application. So let's talk about how things happen, and then you will be able to understand all this term that we're talking about. Okay. So let me see if I can. Okay. So think about it. You are a user in your browser. Okay. You go and says, hey, I'm going to go to cnn.com. Right? Well, you're connected to an internet. Right? That internet finds where cnn.com is located, right? So this is, there will be some machine somewhere, right, saying that, hey, I am a CNN. Okay. And the way it happens is there has to be some physical server, right, where things are running. So you could be running on your laptop, they could be running on a huge machine. Remember, we talked about the three environments, dev, test, and prod. So at some production environment on a CNN or in Time Warner, they will have a server that they say, hey, this sets of server is going to run CNN.com application. Okay. And the way they do it is they run a software, right? Something known as a web server. So this web server essentially looks for all the URLs, right? So the CNN.com is nothing but a URL, right? Which is known as Uniform Resource Locator. Okay. So somewhere on the internet, they said, hey, this particular URL maps to this physical server. All the server has something known as a MAC address and IP address. And that's where all the translation happens. You don't have to worry too much about it, right? That's an internal architecture for the network. But they figured it out. Hey, this, whenever somebody wants to go to CNN.com, it goes to this physical server and this are their IP address. Okay. And the way it happens is when you go to it, right, a home page shows up. So this web server says, hey, you're looking for CNN.com application. And here is the page that I'm going to give it to you. Okay. So within this web server, there's going to be a whole bunch of pages that's going to be grouped together as an application. Right. So if I do it cnn.com/sports, then there will be some sports page. That's what it will get displayed. Okay. Now, if I don't put anything after cnn.com, right? So if I don't put this, it always defaults to one page, and that page is known as a home page. Okay. So if you think about it, your web application is nothing but a set of pages, which are all HTML pages or different types of pages that may be generated on the fly. Okay. They all are grouped together to be known as a web application. Right. So this thing is grouped and known as a web application. Those web applications are hosted inside something known as a web server. So think about a container. Right. This web service is a container. It's again, it's a software program. And now all software program has to run on some part of it, which is your server, physical server. Okay. So when you go out and put a request, the internet identifies which server it is, it routes that request, comes to this web server, and then it says, oh, you're looking for CNN.com application. Oh, here is all sets of pages for that. And since you are looking at the default homepage, I'm going to go ahead and give you this page, and they will return back an HTML code that we'll look into a moment. That comes back to the browser, right? So this request then comes back to the browser in terms of HTML code. Okay, which then browser takes it, parses it, and displays it. So all you see it is a nicely formatted text, pictures, video embedded in everything. That's all nothing but an HTML content. Okay. So what you're going to look into is when you do it is a web server, which was this particular guy, right? So let me see if I can change the color. So this particular guy is a web server. Okay. And it's a website. It's nothing but a collection of pages, right? So this one forms a collection. That's a website. Okay. Web pages are nothing, they are stored into the disk. And then this particular thing is the home page, which is the default first page on that website. Okay. So think of that terminology. So whenever we do an application, right? So all of you looked into Airflow. It runs into what is known as a Microsoft Azure container. Okay, it's a website container. And then when you go by default, it gives you a login page, which is your home page. Right? Because when you put it, if you notice on URL, all it just says that application name / There's nothing else after the first / any of that. Right? So it's always going to pick it up the home page. Okay. So now let's talk about how an application or a website is designed. Okay. So they're trying to first follow certain steps. Okay. So if you look at it, depending on your role or features that you want to offer, your website is going to be different. Right? The way you design an informational website like CNN.com, it's going to be different than the way you design an e-commerce site. Let's say Amazon.com, right? Because one is just providing the information. The other one is essentially performing the transaction-based information, right? The third thing you could be doing is a combination of that. Like, so if you go to Netflix, right, forces you to log in, and based on the transaction that you provided, it gives you a content, right? Sometimes if you go to certain websites, right, like Disney Plus, well, there are by default, there will be certain streams or videos that are available to you. And then certain things you have to purchase it, right? You just say, hey, I want to do a transaction to buy that. So if there is a new movie gets released, they typically, like it says, hey, for first 2 weeks, it's not going to be part of your standard package. You want to see it, you buy it. Right? So depending on the size and the feature and functionality you want to do it, there's going to be a little bit different things, right? So when you put together a site, right, the first thing you need to do is, hey, what exactly is the function and role I want that to play? Right? So that's why the first step is, hey, what kind of content it's going to be on the site? You identify the goals and said, okay, so if I have to do this kind of content, I'm going to put some logins, I want to put some additional things, right? And then you organize those content into main topics. So for example, like at CNN, right? If you go, the way they organized it is, I'm going to have the main news, and I'm going to have a business news, and I'm going to have a health related news, then I'm going to have entertainment news, right? So they put a whole bunch of categories. That's how they organize it. And once they organize it, then they come up with a general structure and pages. Hey, how I'm going to put the new content stores, right? So if you notice it, they will have somewhere on the rendering, they will put the date. It says, hey, this is the news for this particular date. So when you update it with the other content next day, you will get a new page and people can still go back into the previous pages. Okay. So that's an overall design process. But you figure out what you wanted, you organize what structure you want to look like it, and then do it. The perfect example is if you look into the design document, right? They've kind of laid it out and give you a web page flow diagram, right? That's nothing but an organization. It says, hey, this is how we anticipate our website to be designed. Okay. So that gives to you as a quality assurance person an idea. Okay, if you're going to design this way, I know when somebody logs in, they're going to show up on this page. Then when they perform an action, then it's going to be on this page. And which action, depending on that, it might be a conditional action, right? So if they click on this, you go to this page. If they click on this menu, then you go to this page. Okay. So now let's talk about a specific page. Right? So all the page that they are designed, it's known as an HTML, or a lot of times there's hypertext markup language. So if you think about it, that markup language is built not for you to read through it. It's built primarily for a browser to read it and interpret it. Okay, so it tells the browser what to do and what props to use. Because if you look into it, right, certain content will be bolded in a big font. Some content you will see it a different color. Some content you will see image embedded into a specific place, right? How does browser know? HTML page clearly tells it, do this, then do this, then do this, so that when it gets displayed, it displays properly. And the way it does it is through something known as a series of tags. Okay, so it will still be a normal text document, but there are a whole bunch of tags which are kind of integrated into it, which acts as a directive for the browser, do this or do that. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those tags. Okay, so the way you represent tag is that they're going to surround it by the angular brackets. So like this will be the angular bracket. Okay, then you put some directive in between those tags. So every time your browser sees something that comes around, they said, hey, I need to follow this direction, and then they will execute that. Okay. Here's some example. Okay, if I were to bold my text, I'll do it like this. It says that, hey, start this thing instructions. Make it bold. And it'll keep doing till you encounter another pair that tells it now stop bolding. Okay, so majority of tags, not all, but majority of them will come into pair, right? So I will have something like this, some piece of text, and then I'll do this. So it says that, hey, start making everything bold from this point onwards. Browser will make everything in between bold. As soon as it encounters it, okay, go back to normal mode. You don't need to bold anymore. Okay. And you will see it, most of the tags will follow that. Start, this is known as a start tag. And this is known as an end tag. Okay. The only difference between those two is end tag essentially has a forward slash in it. So that's how it knows that, hey, this is an ending instruction. This one is starting directive versus ending directive. There are some exception to it. Like for example, if I'm doing a paragraph or a line return, which is the line break, or if I'm doing a list. Okay. And always the default is the first tag turns action on and second one turns off. Okay. Now, you can embed the tags. Okay. So for example, you can put something known as, hey, I want to bold it, but then I also want to italicize it. And then I will end that. Okay. So it will bold, if you're writing a whole bunch of text, it will bold all of this, but it will italicize only this text. Okay, because it says, hey, this is a bold. So this one, let's say if I write an ABC, it'll make it bold. then it encounters italicized directive and says, okay, since my bold is still on, I'm going to keep continuing bolding it, but now I'm also going to italicize it, right? So this will be a bold and italicized. Then says, hey, I'm turning off the italics. So, but my bold was still on, so it will continue to bold. And then we turn off the bold. There are two things you need to do. Okay. You have to nest it properly. So something known as last in, first out. Okay. So LIFO stands for last in, first out. So all the nesting, so if you're doing a multiple commands nesting in HTML, it has to follow this rule, last in, first out. So what that means is I cannot have, let me see if I can. Okay, so if I having it, let's say a nested okay, or alternatively, somebody may say, hey, I'm going to do this. I want to turn off the bold, and then I'll turn off the italics. Okay. The HTML looks for this condition and says, hey, this was last in. That means this was my last directive. I have to make sure that directive gets turned off first. Okay. Then only it will allow you to turn off this thing. If you try to do this, then it will throw an error. It says, hey, wait a minute, you did not nest it properly. Okay. So that's a requirement in HTML that they will expect it to be nested properly. So here's an example, right? If I'm creating a header page and a title, it has to end title first and then a header. You cannot swap it this way. It's not a case sensitive. So if I write it title, or if I do it like this, it's one and same. Okay. Some of the tags will have something known as attributes. Okay, so here there is a paragraph tag. It has an attribute which says that, hey, I want to align that paragraph in the center. Okay. So what it does is browser looks at, oh, I need to start a new paragraph. Oh, by the way, it has an attribute called align. So I'm going to align it to the center. So when you look into certain text on some pages, certain portion is a kind of aligned one way versus the other portion is aligned. And the way they do it is by providing this text. Okay. Now here's the key thing. Some browsers don't support some tags and some attributes. So if you recall, when we were talking about the web application, we're talking about testing, we talked about compatibility testing, right? The browser compatibility testing. So this is where, as a quality assurance person, you look in it. If you use the tag that is going to work on every browser, or you use the tag that are specific to certain browsers. So the application will not look properly, or it will not work properly in one browser versus the other. So that's why it's important for you to at least understand, hey, you're not using a tag which is specific to this browser, and that's why it doesn't work. Okay. So let's take an example. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to create it in an HTML page. Okay, so we're going to create this. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this stuff. Okay. So I'm going to open a notepad. And within that, I'm going to type this content. Okay. So what I want you guys to look into, let's do this way. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make it much more readable so that you can see it, how the nesting is used. Okay, so I want to write a simple web page. Okay. Okay. So here's an example of HTML. Let me see if I can. Can you guys read it clearly now? Okay. So think about it. I'm calling this as an HTML page. So I'm using my directives to say, hey, this is an HTML page. This is the start of the page. This is end of the page. Within that, I've nested it. I said, hey, I'm going to call something as a header. Within that header, I have a title, right? And then I have a body. Okay. And then both header and a body both belongs in HTML. So if you look into it, right, I always, this was first in or last in, right? So it's either first in, last out, or last in, first out. It's one and same thing. Okay. So what was the last one that I used in this nesting? So if I go into this path, right, I did HTML, then I added head and added title. So I know that I need to finish the title first. So that's where you see it, end of the title tag first. Then there is an end of header tag. Oh, by the way, before I ended the HTML tag, I added a new one. So I'm going to do a body. Then that one has to end first before I can end the HTML tag. Okay. So I'll put a whole bunch of instructions and then I will save it. And this is an important part, right? So if I do a file save as, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and look into fall 2021. Done. So I'm just going to use this type. Okay. Now, what's an important thing is I'm not going to call it a text document. I'm going to call it something known as an HTML document. So I'm going to do this is I'm going to just call it first HTML page. Okay. .html. So the extension I'm providing is .html. Okay. So if you look at it, right, it's first HTML page. If I look into the browser, it will just say it's first HTML page. It's the time, like 9:54, which is the clock right now that I created just now. Okay. Now look at that. There is a browser symbol associated with it, which tells us, hey, all of the HTML page I want open by default into a Chrome browser. Okay. So when I open it, right, this is what it gets rendered into the browser. So this was your HTML text, right? And that's how it showed up. So anything which was in the header, if you notice that none of that information came up here, right? A lot of times your header is used in HTML to store the metadata information. However, this thing, remember title hello? If you look on the top of the tab, it showed up as a hello. That's where it gets the information about title. And then body, it just says hello. This is my first page. Okay. Now we talked about the nesting, right? So let's look at it, what happens. If I change the nesting, okay. So I messed up, right? My nesting. It's no longer now that. And if I just save it, I'm going to save, and I'm going to refresh it. Look at this. Did you see it? My title messed up. It did not display as what I'm expecting it. Okay. Another example, you can just say, hey, what if I do it completely? So now I have a body tag which is missing. Look what it did. It ignored some things, right? So it's now my behavior is no longer predictable. Right? So the key thing is that if I want everything to be displayed properly, okay? There's a couple of other things I want to show you, right? The white spacing on HTML, that means how it looked, it's nice and pretty, doesn't matter, right? So if I just say, let's say, if I do like this, right? It's nice and pretty, right? Let me add the body type properly too. Right? So the expectation is, hey, I have this thing on line 1, this one should be on line 2, right? And I can just say, if I do that, watch what happens. Okay, so the white space on HTML does not matter. It's only the tags that tells the browser what to do it. So for example, if I do this, I'm going to say, hey, create a new line breaks. Now it showed up in the new one. Now you can format for your readability if you want to do it. But if I do it this way, everything is in one line. Doesn't matter to it. It will still show up this way. Okay. So it's all are the tags which is driving how the page is going to be get displayed. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is actually build an HTML page. So bring up your laptop, okay, and try to create an HTML page. Now there are a few things that I want you to pay attention when you create an HTML. The first one is you can open any editor, right? If you notice that I just opened a notepad and started typing into it. The key thing is that when you save it, right? So when I say it's file save as, make sure it's no longer text document. You select all files and store it either as an .html or .htm. That's the only way it says that, hey, this is an HTML page, not a text page. Okay. If you do that, and when you open in the browser, it will show up. It will give you the location, right? Here is the location where I saved my page. And here is the name of that file. Yeah, you can save it anywhere on your laptop, any location. Right. So what I want you to do is take a minute. Here is a step-by-step instruction. Okay. And again, you can use any browser. Like I use Chrome. You can use Edge, Safari, Internet Explorer. Pick your choice. Okay. And then you can just do that. So you have copy this page, create, see if your page shows up like this. Okay. I'll give you guys 5 minutes to do that. Okay. This gives you a practice of creating an HTML page. I'm gonna leave it at this page since you already have step-by-step instructions and the content in your paper. Okay. Okay. Online, are you guys okay? Do you know what to do it?
Yes.
All right, let's take 5 minutes and do that. Stop the note, just.
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? I have my notepad.
Hmm?
I have. What
So
am I-
you have it. Remember like, the instructions that you gave? Create this page and make sure it displays like this in the browser. Follow the same steps that I did it in front of you guys. Here, I'll leave this for you guys to see it too. Which you do it in a Word, don't do it in a Word. Do it in a notepad or it's.
Hi,
Yes,
what is IE?
well, I use Internet Explorer. You can open it in a Chrome or Microsoft Edge. So as long as look into any of this kind of browsers, you're good.
Okay.
I don't have a notepad here.
Oh, so just look any text editor. What are the text editors into? happening here. That's an Internet Explorer, right? So you can use a Chrome or Edge or anything. It's a browser. Yeah, but whichever way you save it, right? Where do you save it? Yeah, so just go on that. There's nothing in it. Go back. You don't have any content. No, go back to your notebook. There's no content. Someone displaying. Put this content. Yeah, so just say whatever dot HTML, whatever you want to call it, my first page.
Everything should be in caps.
Yeah, it doesn't. Say that. That's okay. It's using by default. You've never used any text editors in the Mac? Then I would suggest you bring the laptop that you're comfortable with.
I've been used this, but I've never.
So just Google it and say, like it's a notepad or HTML editor. And see what application.
That should be a text editor, is it a Mac?
Yeah. There's a text editor, but I think she has set it everything before, so I can.
Oh, I see.
So
There might be an app.
that's what I'm saying. Check for text editor on that. Go to your apps, go to find it. Look in the application.
Is similar to.
Yeah, the one of the notes. No, but notes, so that it's just puts all of this. You have text editor. Which is your. Just search on it, saying HTML file and text editor on that.
Here in the.
Yeah.
Pre-download.
No, it's not that. It's how to save an HTML file using text editor on that. HTML using text editor. That's fine.
Is it, you see the download text editor?
She already has that.
Okay. Yeah, it just says choose the new format, make plain text, enter that you have.
Yeah.
Choose file and save.
So choose format, make format. Right. So open that, choose file. It should be a- Yeah. Go back to the support. The instruction set. Close it, Robert. Close it. Choose file, select new, choose format, make, follow that, open the text editor. Close this. Close. Yeah. So, new. Go into the file, format, look into the assumptions. Yeah. Now just look up the HTML stuff and then you save it. You can save it as you can open the other one also, whether it's restoring. Yeah, it was, it's really that's. Close.
And just put
Close. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. So we worry about that. We'll have to go through that later. But like it's, if you just do it as a text, what it is, it's still considering that as a text. That's why we'll not display on the graph. If you take it out that word text, just keep it always. Okay. Everybody else able to get the file, HTML file?
yes.
Oh, you're doing it in a Word.
Yes.
Do it on a notepad, please. Okay. The files here. Okay. All comes. Good. Got it. No, you put the end. Dot extension.
It's extension, so.
Extension, it's a file extension. So you put the file name dot HTML. Again, file names should not have spaces in it. If you try to put spaces on it, things is not gonna work.
Keep it simple, no space, no characters, no other special character or anything. Just put whatever test, not FTL.
Yeah. Online, were you able to do it? Any questions?
Yes, I able to do it.
Okay. Like you got it.
Yeah.
So. She got it, so we'll figure it out later. You got to get more comfortable. And what I would recommend is if you're not very familiar with the MacBook, then use one of the laptop from here and use that.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the laptop, let me know. And I'll look it up. Yeah.
Thanks. All right. This are like it's you figured it out how to make changes. You can just save it the same file and do it. Here is the structure that you looked at it, right? So there is a header. So if you look into it, there is a header, right? So you're gonna have a header and a body, and everything is contained within a page. Okay. Now, you can use the different tags to display the different things. So you can just center it. You can do a line break. We saw the line break one. You can make it a different heading size. So if you want to make it a bigger or a smaller, you can do those kind of things, right? So right, so if I kind of just say, hey, I want this thing to be a big header. You can do that, right? Now you see it become a header page. So when you go into different header size on the page, sometimes it displays differently.
Where can we find the tags? Like,
So you can go ahead and look into something known as w3schools.com, and then you can just use that. So if you go to the browser and then just go through.
Yes, yes.
If you go to w3schools.com, it has a step-by-step instructions for you want to use HTML. It's all video tutorial, learning, all the reference. And you will see it like it's now a lot of newer ones came as HTML5, which is HTML's 5th version of the iteration. And you can just get it all the different types of tutorials. You can just want to get an HTML and CSS. If you wanted, you can just get an XML, which we'll talk here in a minute. All the different programming languages also, if you're really interested.
is it a paid site?
No, this is a free site.
Oh, okay.
There are some paid courses, but those are like it's the ones that we talked about, it's all free.
Oh, okay.
You can just go ahead and like it's, hey, I want to do this. I want to create a forms. You can do it different types, different input types. You can look into all those things. Text, when you want to do a password, the poll 9 yen, radio button, right? So now the other set, so far we saw it only the plain, but you can put the data controls that I was just showing you on that side. That allows you to do a checkbox or a drop-down list or allow you to enter a text box and so on. Okay, you can create certain buttons and display those things. So I'm going to show you a quick example. Okay, you can see it in this one. I've created the text entry. There's also a drop down. You can use it. You can do that if you want to see the code for it. Right, you can just see it here. Right, I've created an input type of text. And set it up that you can use it. Here is the drop down. Okay, you said, hey, there is a select option, and this one's here are the values. Right, I want a checkbox. Right, and then I have a submit type. Right? So if you go look into this one, there is a submit, there is a checkbox. Right, and I've the reason I did it like it's in a TD, which is essentially nothing but the table rows and table data, because so that I can align everything in there. So I would strongly recommend look into those tutorials and get yourself familiar with it, right? Now, there is another cool trick that I'm going to show you that you can do it in most of the browsers. Right? Is you can always right click on it. And then you can always say it's a view page source. It'll tell you the whole HTML file that is used it to build that page on the browser itself. Right? So certain files are going to be very complicated, right? So if I go to CNN.com and say, hey, I want look at this, how rich this thing is, right? All those things. So if I click on and just says view page source, just look at it, how much it shows up. Right? So when you're like it's testing an app and things doesn't come up the way you expected, you can always look into view page source and see what it's trying to display and why it's not coming up properly. Okay. So those are the text things you can do it. Because that essentially data entry controls, which will allow you to do all those things. Okay. You can add images. I just showed you on the CNN, like it says that. And the way you do it is by using this tag image. You identify what is a source file and use those tags. Okay. And then it has attributes. Remember how paragraph had align equal to center? Image, you can have a whole bunch of how much width and height you want it. In the event that image is not able to see it, what is the alternate text you want to do it? Right? And how do you want to align the image? Do you want to align it left, right, center, fit into certain box criteria? You can do all those things. Okay. If you want to add a link, you can use an href tag. So if you go look in here, I put go to IntelliX, it's a link, right? And the way you can do it is by using href tag. You identify what location or URL you want to go with, what text you want to be displayed. Right? So it will show this text, but when somebody clicks on it, it will take you to this site. Okay, so if you look at it, just, oh, because I don't have the URL form properly. But you can just do that. Okay. Now the question is, why do you need it, right? So as you go through it, all the applications that you're going to be testing, majority of them will be a web application, including the R form. Well, things doesn't look at it. Well, how can I go understand a little bit more about it? Well, you can just right click view page source, and look into it. Later on, when we start doing automation testing, you will realize the importance of all those data controls and data types, right? And Harshal will walk you through those things at that time. How to identify, because you need to know which data control you're accessing it, right? Because when you're trying to do this, there are 4 things on this page. How do I know which one is what? What is it called? And so on, right? So to access those, that's all you really do. Okay. So what I would recommend all of you is, as you go home, look into that w3schools.com site. Spend some time, get yourself familiar with HTML. And they also have a nice ways to go and you can try it out. See how this thing? You can try it yourself. Okay, so like just to go do it, you can make any changes to this, right? So here. Right, you can just say first name only, right? Then you will see those changes. So you can actually make some changes into the HTML, see how it behaves, what it changes, and so on, right? So let's say if I want to change the submit to a login, it will, oh, and sorry, this one should be the, submit. This one should be logged. So you can see it if I made a mistake, what things I need to fix it to go back and see it. Right. So this is a nice site that essentially allows you to learn it, figure it out, change things, go fix it, what's getting wrong. Okay. Any question on HTML before we move to XML? Online, are you guys good?
Yes.
All right. So let's look into the other one. So all of you looked at it. Somebody? No. So we talked about it in HTML. However, there is also a concept known as XML. Okay, let's look at that and you will see it where each one of them is used. Okay. So you need to understand what is the difference and how do you create an XML document. Okay. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. Okay. So HTML was a hypertext markup language. XML is extensible markup. The primary purpose of XML is to build document that contains structured information. So HTML was primarily used to present the information, right? So you had tag, you're telling browser what to do it and telling how to display it. XML essentially allows you to tell it, hey, if I'm trying to pass in sets of information from one place to another place, what is the structured way? Okay, so perfect example of passing the information in XML. So remember, we talked about Amazon with the checkout process, right? You're trying to provide your credit card information, the amount you wanted, when is credit card expiry date, maybe some authentication information of that 3-digit or 4-digit, depending on the card that you're doing it, and how much money you're trying to charge it. That information needs to be sent to whatever the payment gateway is, right? So how do you send that information? How do you tell in what order what information is? That's what the XML is about. Creating that structured document so that you can send it across the machine. Okay. So the key difference is in HTML. We said that, hey, there is only fixed set, right? They are not case sensitive, right? And you cannot define your own tags. In XML, it's an extensible set of tags. So you can define your own tags to call whatever you want. Okay. HTML is mainly used for presentation, as we talked about, right? Because it's telling the browser, display this in this format and do this and do that. Versus XML is primarily content oriented. In other words, here's the pieces of data I want to store. Here's how it's structured. Okay. HTML, we saw it, right? I changed it certain things. It still tried to display as much as, and if not, it just threw up an error and just showed it. So there is no data validation capabilities in HTML. In XML, you can enforce it. You can just say, hey, you know what? Here's the piece which is optional. Here is the piece which is mandatory. So for example, if you're trying to put a credit card information, you better provide me an expiry date. If there is no expiration date, I'll reject this document as an incomplete document. Okay. HTML, you can display only one format on your browser, visual presentation. XML, you can take that data and essentially display into various different formats. Okay. So how do you write an XML? Okay. So it's the same thing. It's made it up, your start tag and end tag with the data in between. Remember the structure we say angular brackets? So it's the same thing. The key only difference here is, as you can see here, I can define my own tag. So I created a tag called director and put a name of the person who directed that movie. Okay, so this is the way I can put it. If I want to collect information about a movie, it says, this is the metadata, right? So if you go to Netflix or any of the streaming service, right? It shows up, hey, here's the starting page that it shows up, right? It shows up in that browser. However, the data structure behind it is all XML. Okay. So you can do it different value, but you want to create your own tags. So you can create a director tag, you can create actor tag. It may have the same value, it may have different values. It doesn't matter. The only key difference is in HTML, as we said, it's title, uppercase, lowercase doesn't matter. In XML, it does matter. So what it means is all these three tags are completely different tags. City with all caps, city with just what C as a cap, and all lowercase. They all three are three different elements. Now, one of the other things that XML allows you is to abbreviate the empty tag. So you can just do it, matter if there is no data in it. In HTML, you'll still keep it like this, saying that it's an empty data. Here, you can just do it like this. Okay. So let's take an example. Okay. You can also have a name value pair as an attribute. So the way you do it is you can say, hey, here's the name of the city. That's the key element. But I'm going to call an attribute called zip. So I can define my own attribute, which in HTML I could not. In XML, I can create my own attribute and say, hey, this tag called city has an attribute called zip, and here is the value of it. Okay. So they are typically used to provide an additional information. So for example, I can have a basic XML document that can include nested elements. Okay, so we talked about book. Here's an example of the book. Okay. So I have a book which is a collection of things. Inside that, I have one entry called just the book. So think of it, if I'm trying to represent the bookshelf, which has 10 books, here's the first book. Okay. And here is my property, right? So every book has an ISBN number, and the value for this book's ISBN is this. What is the title and who is the author? Structure a lot more similar to HTML if you think about it. Same nesting, same rules, just that I can create my own thing. The only difference is if I'm using an XML document to contain multiple entries, I can have only one root entry, which is called books. So I can't create another books on the same file. I have only one. Okay. So I want you to think about a visualization, right? What kind of information, right? So think of it as a collection of books, which is at the top, right? So you have the collection of books. So this is my collection. I have only one collection, has two books. Here's one, here's the second, right? So this is book one, this is book two. All the information about book one is who is the author, this person, title, this thing. When it was published is this thing, right? Same thing with that. Now you can refer a book, so you can build a relationship that, hey, remember how sometimes you said, hey, similar books by the same author, you can just show it like that. Or similar book on the same topics, you can do those kind of relationships. But at the end of the day, it's only one collection. Okay. So the key things, there are certain rules that you have to put in. They have to have always a start tag and an end tag. It has to be clearly nested. Same rule as HTML, there's no difference here. Okay. If I use attributes like ISBN number or a zip code that you saw an example, it must be enclosed in quotation marks. Okay, so I should say it's whatever the key attribute is equal to, and the value has to be in quotation marks. Okay. And every document must have a unique first element called root node. So in the example that we talked about here, this is the root node. I can have only one of that.
Dilip, can you make that clear? Like you were talking about the relation in the diagram, like what's the
Yeah,
relation?
So relation is like essentially you can add an additional attribute and there's, hey, similar books. And then you can put the book IDs there. Okay, so let me get to an example. Okay, so you see it's an example here. Okay, so this is my root node. It has 3 collection of books, right? And I can just put, if I'm interested in it, right? I can put things like this. And then this could be an ID here that they can just use it. And I can have more than one related books, right? So I can just have like this. So whenever I'm displaying this information about this, well, this is 1, 2, 3, so I'll just put. You can say that, hey, to this book, and then you can define what is the relation. Is it the same author, same topic, whatever you want to call it, right? But that's how you can define the structure. Okay, and then okay, so that's what, like it's this time, you can say, hey, there is a reference, there is a relationship. It's essentially whatever you want to call it. You have ability to define that into the structure. Okay. So so you guys showed this example, right? So let me show you a couple of neat things on this one. Okay. So this is my books. If you want to see it, you can just essentially open with a browser and it will show up. Okay. So I can collapse it, expand it, I can see through it. Huh? Okay, so you can just see it. Hey, this books node is a collection of 3 books. Now this one is, I haven't saved any pieces of data, right? So I kind of showed you the relationships, right? If I save it, now you can see all those relationships here. Okay. Couple of things I want you to notice is you always have to put a root node at the top. This, all it does is it indicates that, hey, this document is an XML document and it is of version 1.0. Okay. Then you follow, this is a root node, right? So this one is my root node. I don't think I can do this. So let's hit this one. For whatever reason, I'm not able to use the marker on the browsers. But here's the root node. Okay, it has one and only one. Now the browser, if you look into it, parse it, and give it, oh yeah, it recognizes an XML document because I had that particular thing here, that this is XML version 1. but it just said, hey, there's no style information associated with it. So it's by default, it's looking a version and a style so that I can display accordingly. But if it's not, it'll just displays it as a tree. Now, look at this, right? So if I don't have any piece of data, right, I can change this thing to display an empty element like this, right? Look at it, it will show up as an empty element. Okay. Now, if I mess up and forget this thing, right, so now it's no longer a properly formatted document because I don't have a closing tag. Okay. See, it started giving error because it's trying to validate the document. Versus if you looked in HTML, it still tried to display something. It didn't throw error. This one says that, hey, I have an error. It says at line 9, column 11, an opening and ending tag mismatch. So it's trying to it's identify where the issue is. So if you look into at this one, right, it says line 9 at column 11. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So it is encountering and says, hey, I'm keep looking, but I didn't find it. And all of a sudden I started having a different tag that ended. So there's a problem, right? So you have to look for that. The moment I do this, it will be able to fix it. Said, oh, I can parse it properly. Okay. Any questions on this? If you go to the other side that I mentioned, right? W3 schools. Okay. And if you go to this one, it gives you all the XML tutorials. It's encoding that. Putting it, you can still use the same tryout. Here's the examples. You can try out. You can explain each one of them. Right, so the simple XML file, you can go see that. Here's the way you can put a food menu. Right, here's the breakfast menu. Here are the different items in the breakfast menu. You guys good? Any questions around XML? Okay. So what I want you to do, if you don't have any questions, I'm going to assign you an exercise that you will need to do it as a homework. Okay, so what I want you to do it is create an XML file showing the places you have visited, right? So if you're trying to create a catalog and says, hey, I've gone to this, and think about your travel diary or whatever you want, right? So H visited place should provide information about when you visit. Okay. So this thing could be, if you were to create at least so you can put it this way, right? So for example, let's say I visited New York City. I visited, let's say in 2001, right? It was a leisure visit. That means I went for fun. It didn't go from the work related, right? I saw it at that time. I saw it World Trade Center, Statue of Liberty. Okay, then saw a whole bunch of museums. Okay. And then went with the family, right? So if I want to capture this, here's the data that you can capture, right? So I want you to is okay. So this is the data, right? So this was my place of visit was that. When I visited was 2001. It was a leisure visit. And I saw three things, right? And I had family with me. Right, so here are the 5 questions. Those are possible answers. And then do it. So your job is to create an XML file of well-formatted. So I should be able to go into the browser just like this and see it and collapse all those 5 things and see it. Okay. So pick whatever, just make an XML file and then send that XML file to me and Herschel. Okay. Any questions online? Are you guys good with the homework? Just type it in a notepad, save it instead of HTML file, save it as .xml file. Open it up in a browser, make sure it looks it, make sure it's all validated properly. Because remember I showed you, if you don't have proper validation, it's going to throw an error. So fix all the errors, see it, how it looks nicely, and then send it to me in Herschel for review. Okay, make sure there is at least 5 entries because this one, the book example has 3 entries. Your travel file should have 5 entries.
Send the book entries.
Yeah, or if you just go to this one, W3 schools that I mentioned, right? You can see it all the examples. Right, so you can just see it in XML examples. Right, you can just click on any of that. Right, so CD catalog, here's the example. Right, if you want to see it into text one, you can just open it up and view into that. So you should be able to use any of those. Right, you have to give the attributes, talks about the attributes. So whatever format you want to do it, do that. Right, make sure your XML file has a couple of attributes so that you have practice around that. Okay. Yes, good with the example homework. We're still going to leave it here so you can just copy and paste it and send this.
Yeah. That's
Okay. Why it's needed. Right. So in a moment, we'll start talking about the web services and testing. But remember, as I said, like it's a perfect example, Amazon, I want to get the payment. Well, I need to format the data into XML, send it to them, get the response back. So anytime you try to represent certain piece of structured data within a system, you can use an XML to do that. All right, let's take a quick 5-minute break. And then we'll jump into the next topic on the SOAP UI. So I'm going to pause the record.